Sports events feel predictable. Fast plays, routine risks, and the usual roar of a crowd. But in rare moments, an athlete's last seconds unfold in front of everyone with no warning at all. These 6 stories show how quickly an ordinary event can shift into something far more serious. It was March 7, 2015, in a small Kansas community, during a spring sports expo held inside a local arena. The weather outside was clear, and the crowd inside gradually increased. Families, students, and residents filled the seats, creating a busy but ordinary weekend atmosphere as they waited for the next event to start. One of the performers scheduled that evening was 28-year-old Brian Laird, a high school PE teacher and active competitor in the small regional wrestling circuit. He worked a full season of weekend shows each year and was familiar to local crowds who followed independent events around the county. A mix of his students, co-workers, and regular attendees from nearby towns were in the stands that night. His entrances typically stayed simple: props, light jokes, and short walk-ins that required little setup or risk. For this event, however, organizers wanted a more attention-grabbing opening for the third match. They arranged for Brian to be lowered from the rafters using a rented harness system that was typically used to hang banners inside the venue. Because it was designed for static displays, the rig used a basic chest attachment rather than a full-body performer harness. The equipment arrived late in the afternoon, and workers were still adjusting clips and cables as the first matches began. According to one spectator near the entrance tunnel, a rigger was seen struggling with a locking clip that appeared jammed. The worker tapped it with a small tool before moving on, and the setup continued without delay. The plan called for Brian to be clipped into the harness about 30 feet above the ring. When the arena lights dimmed, a spotlight would shine upward, and the crew would lower him slowly. Once he reached a safe height over the ring, he would unhook the main clip, drop a short distance onto the mat, and start the match. It was intended to be a simple entrance, not a major stunt. As the third match began, the lights dimmed and a single spotlight illuminated Brian above the ring. Fans could clearly see him secured in the harness, waving toward the crowd. A few people on the floor began recording with their phones. The system started lowering him, and everything looked normal for the first few seconds. People in the upper bleachers were the first to notice a problem. One of the side support lines slackened suddenly, dropping a few inches as if it had slipped free. Someone shouted that a line had come loose, drawing attention from nearby spectators. With the loss of tension, the harness tilted sharply to Brian's right. With the sideline no longer bearing weight, nearly the entire load shifted onto a single central connector. The shift caused his right shoulder to slide partway out of the main strap. From the lower seats, the movement looked quick and uncontrolled. Brian turned in the air as he tried to steady himself, but the remaining clip was forced to take most of the weight. Several witnesses in the first few rows reported hearing a metallic snap, consistent with a carabiner gate or locking shackle failing under load, a sharp sound that carried through the quiet arena. The final line failed, and Brian fell straight down. He struck the corner of the ring instead of the padded center, landing chest first on the ring frame, which stood a little over 3 feet high. The impact caused his body to bend forward before he rolled onto the floor beside the apron. Silence spread through the arena almost immediately. People near the barricade stood from their seats, unsure what they had witnessed. Some attempted to move closer, but security blocked off the area and directed them back. Staff and stage crew reached Brian within moments and signaled for the show to stop. The expo halted the event and instructed spectators to remain seated. It was confirmed within minutes that Brian had not survived. His injuries were consistent with severe blunt force trauma to the chest from the impact with the ring edge. The crowd was dismissed after the announcement, and the rest of the evening's program was canceled. A review in the following days cited equipment failure and improper rigging. The locking clip that workers had struggled with earlier had not been secured correctly, allowing a support line to slip free during the descent. As a result, the expo discontinued all aerial entrances and advised small venues against using rented rigging systems for similar performances. It was July 18, 2016, during a warm, dry afternoon near Denver, where a regional open-wheel race drew a few hundred spectators. The small circuit had tight corners and short straights, creating steady braking zones that audiences could watch clearly. Most fans gathered around Turn 6, a left-hand corner known for sudden speed changes. On the entry list that day was 24-year-old Marcus Elwood, a graduate engineering student and active regional open-wheel driver. He competed throughout the season at small circuits across northern Colorado and western Kansas, and regulars around the paddock recognized his number from previous heats. Marcus approached racing with a structured routine, logging every mechanical change in a notebook and staying late after practice runs to fine-tune his setup. A few classmates who followed his races had come to watch him compete that afternoon. Earlier that summer, Marcus had replaced part of his car's fuel line system to fix a minor leak detected during maintenance. A volunteer mechanic assisted him, installing a new section of flexible fuel hose using a compression fitting. Marcus logged the repair, but mentioned during warm-ups that he still smelled occasional traces of fuel when the engine ran at higher RPMs. Others nearby heard the comment, though the odor didn't appear strong enough to raise immediate concern. By race time, the seating near Turn 6 was nearly full. The cars completed their formation lap, the green flag waved, and the field accelerated smoothly. Marcus settled into a mid-pack position as the early corners unfolded without contact. Spectators near Turn 6 saw each driver brake hard before entering the corner and accelerate out toward the next straight. On the fifth lap, Marcus exited Turn 5 cleanly and built speed on the short straight. His car appeared stable from the viewpoint of the crowd, with the front wheels aligned and no visible tire issues. A few people later recalled noticing a thin wisp of vapor trailing briefly behind the vehicle, though it dissipated quickly and wasn't immediately associated with a problem. As he approached the braking zone for Turn 6, Marcus slowed as expected, but approaching the apex, the rear of his car stepped out slightly, something that can happen when traction changes or when fluid reaches a hot surface. The correction sent the vehicle toward the outside of the corner. Witnesses behind the fence saw the car travel off the racing line, move across the rumble strip, and enter the gravel runoff. Moments later, the car struck the outer concrete barrier at a shallow angle. The impact wasn't the hardest of the day, but it was forceful enough to crush the side pod where the modified fuel line ran. A split second after contact, a burst of flame appeared near the right side of the chassis. The car rotated slightly and came to a stop with fire spreading across the engine compartment. Spectators stepped back as the heat rose above the barrier. Corner marshals used handheld extinguishers and radioed for additional fire equipment. Within seconds, the flames intensified when fuel from the damaged line ignited. Thick smoke formed a column above the runoff area, and race control immediately threw the red flag, halting the event. When marshals reached the cockpit, they found no signs of movement. Fire crews contained the flames and cooled the vehicle before extraction could begin. The race was suspended for the remainder of the day. Officials later confirmed that Marcus died at the scene. The cause of death was attributed to severe thermal injuries, sustained immediately after the fire reached the cockpit area. A post-incident inspection revealed that the replacement fuel hose had detached at the compression fitting when the side pod crushed inward. The failure allowed fuel to spray onto hot engine components, igniting the fire seconds after the collision. Investigators classified the event as a mechanical fault caused by an improper repair and the lack of approved racing-grade fuel fittings. It was February 9, 2017, and a regional playoff game was underway in a university gym in the Monroe area. The building filled quickly with students, parents, and residents, creating a warm, crowded atmosphere typical of school events as everyone settled in before tip-off. One of Monroe's starters was 21-year-old forward Daniel Mercer, a junior who had logged steady minutes in every season since joining the team. He'd played in gyms across the conference, from small community colleges to larger suburban arenas, and people who followed Monroe basketball recognized his number from those road games. Around campus, Students who attended home matchups knew him for his physical defense, clean box-outs, and consistent rebounding. He carried no major injuries on record, and coaches regarded him as one of the more durable and reliable athletes on the roster. Monroe opened the game with clean possessions and controlled most of the first half. Daniel made 2 early rebounds and a putback, and the student section responded to each play with short chants. Viewers seated above midcourt had a clear line of sight as Monroe rotated players in and out. The pace stayed quick, but nothing appeared unusual. Late in the half, Daniel moved into a defensive position near the restricted area as the opposing team ran a drive off the right wing. When the guard pushed toward the basket, Daniel shifted left to contest. As he planted his right foot to absorb the contact, his shoe slipped on a damp spot, likely condensation or sweat from an earlier collision. His ankle rolled inward sharply, causing his upper body to tilt off balance. At the same time, the driving player's knee struck Daniel's lower ribs from the side, an accidental but forceful impact. The collision redirected Daniel's momentum. He fell backward and struck the right side of his head on the hardwood floor, directly on the edge of the semicircle. Several people seated along the baseline saw the impact clearly and reacted immediately. Daniel's arms did not brace the fall, and his head hit the surface with enough force to make an audible sound across the lower rows. Players on both sides slowed down as soon as they noticed Daniel wasn't getting back to his feet. A teammate stepped toward him first, then waved toward the bench for help. The officials blew the whistle, and the ball was left where it rolled as everyone recognized that something had gone wrong. Staff reached Daniel quickly. From the sideline, people closest to the court saw him lying completely still, while trainers checked his breathing and assessed his head and neck. Those higher in the bleachers could see that he wasn't reacting to touch or verbal cues. Ushers walked along the aisles and asked the crowd to stay where they were, so the court remained clear. Both teams moved toward their benches, while administrators and officials met near the scorer's table. After several minutes of discussion, they instructed players to leave the floor and return to the locker areas. The normal noise of the gym faded, replaced only by staff communicating with each other as they continued working around Daniel. The decision was made not to restart the game. Medical staff later confirmed that Daniel had suffered a traumatic brain injury from the direct impact of his head hitting the floor. The blow caused rapid bleeding inside the skull and immediate disruption to the brainstem, injuries that do not allow for recovery once they occur. With the outcome confirmed, the league called off the rest of the playoff round. A brief statement was issued the following morning, noting the fatal incident, announcing the suspension of competition, and confirming that the gym would remain closed for the week while the athletic department completed its review and cleanup. It was October 22, 2018, in Osaka during a preseason volleyball match. The weather outside was cool and dry, while inside the mid-sized arena the air was steady and quiet. Spectators watched from the stands as the teams moved through routine warm-ups and early plays. A women's team from Seattle was in Japan for a short exhibition series. One of their outside hitters was 32-year-old Lauren Bryce, a 6'4" veteran who had played professionally overseas for several years. During the exhibition tour, Lauren adjusted to the travel better than most. Fans seated near the team's warm-up zone occasionally watched her stretch between drills, noting her careful, deliberate routine before she stepped back onto the court. The first 2 sets moved quickly, with long rallies and clean plays from both sides. The Osaka crowd applauded calmly after each rally. The benches were lined with towels, water bottles, and clipboards, while coaches stood a few feet behind the boundary line. Midway through the third set, after a long defensive exchange, Seattle made a substitution. Lauren rotated out and walked to the bench. Spectators sitting directly behind that area had a clear view as she grabbed a towel, wiped her face, and sat in the second seat from the left. Her breathing looked heavier than usual, but nothing appeared out of place as she leaned back briefly and watched the next rally begin. Fans near the bench first noticed Lauren leaning forward to adjust her shoe. She stayed in that position longer than normal, her shoulders rising and falling in a slower rhythm. A moment later, her posture changed, Her left arm slipped off her leg and her upper body tipped sideways against the bench frame. A teammate beside her glanced over, reached toward her, and tapped her arm. When she didn't react, the teammate stiffened, called out to the coaches, and signaled urgently toward the sideline. People in the nearby rows stood to see what was happening. Play continued briefly until an opposing player pointed toward the sideline, and the referee stopped the rally. Attention from both teams moved to the bench as the gym quieted. Staff reached Lauren quickly. Athletic trainers and venue medical staff began immediate advanced life support measures, working around the bench while teammates stepped back to give them room. From the seating area, spectators could see that she still hadn't moved since collapsing. The collapse produced no outward signs of injury, a presentation consistent with catastrophic internal vascular failure. Venue workers walked the aisles and asked people to remain in their seats, and a brief announcement followed, instructing the crowd to stay where they were while staff continued their assessment. After a short discussion at the scorer's table, officials decided the match would not continue. Spectators were directed to exit through the upper concourse, and as the gym emptied, staff remained positioned around the bench area. Lauren was taken to an off-court treatment area, but did not regain consciousness. A medical examiner later confirmed an acute aortic rupture linked to an underlying connective tissue disorder. The findings were added to the league's annual health and safety review, which included recommendations for expanded cardiac and vascular screening for players traveling internationally. Players returned to Seattle quietly that week, with the organization placing the rest of the preseason trip on hold, while officials handled travel logistics and spoke with league staff. It was May 12, 2015, during a spring steeplechase meet in Pennsylvania. Mild weather and a dry track brought out around 1,500 spectators, filling the small grandstand and lining the fence as hobby riders and semi-pros spent the day navigating a series of evenly spaced 3-foot jumps. Michael Brandt, 30, was a stable hand and a regular rider in regional steeplechase events, known for handling horses with a calm, steady pace. He wasn't high profile, but he had a small group of local supporters who followed his races, and some of them were at the meet that day. After Solstice Runner's usual jockey sprained an ankle, Michael stepped in and spent the previous evening adjusting to her longer stride through slow practice laps. To make weight, he jogged around the property before dawn. The preparation was rushed, but he felt steady enough to compete. By late morning, the paddock was busy with horses being brushed, checked, and saddled. Michael adjusted Solstice Runner's girth several times and tested the reins for tension. He wore borrowed racing colors and an older helmet that showed years of wear along the padding. Spectators leaned along the outer rail as riders warmed up, some taking short trots before being called to the start. When the starter signaled the beginning of the heat, the horses moved together into the first stretch. Michael settled into the middle of the group, letting Solstice Runner choose a comfortable rhythm. The opening hurdles passed smoothly. The mare jumped cleanly, and several onlookers commented that the pair looked well matched, considering their short training time. The issue began near the 4th jump on the far side of the track. As Solstice Runner cleared the rail, the landing knocked her right hind shoe loose. The shoe did not fall off immediately. It bent outward and began striking her opposite hind leg each time she stepped. A few spectators close to that section said they heard a metallic clicking sound right after the jump. Michael appeared to notice something was off. He rose higher in the stirrups, likely trying to stabilize himself as the mare's stride grew uneven. The mare continued forward, but the bent shoe struck her leg again, causing a brief cross-step. The sudden uneven gait pitched Michael slightly forward, though he stayed in the saddle. As they approached the final turn, the shoe finally came free. It flew off mid-stride and caused the mare to misstep sharply with her hind legs. The jolt traveled through the saddle, and Michael's balance shifted. His weight moved to one side, and several spectators later said they saw him try to reset his posture, but the misstep had thrown off both his leverage and his timing. Entering the home stretch, Solstice Runner regained speed, but Michael did not recover his seat. When the mare extended into a faster stride, he tipped sideways. His right foot slipped from the stirrup, followed by the left. He slid off the saddle and fell onto the inside edge of the track. striking his head and neck on packed dirt despite the helmet. Handlers reached Michael quickly and formed a buffer, while stewards stopped movement. Solstice Runner was caught and taken to the paddock, where veterinary staff inspected her and noted the bent shoe's marks. On the track, medical personnel continued working around Michael, checking for signs of breathing or purposeful movement while spectators watched quietly from the rail. The infield area was partially closed as paramedics prepared a stretcher and additional equipment. Despite their efforts, Michael showed no recovery at any point, and paramedics informed race officials that the injuries to his head and neck were unsurvivable. A later medical review confirmed that Michael had sustained a fatal cervical spine injury, with the impact to his head and neck causing immediate trauma that could not be reversed. Stewards suspended the remainder of the day's program and began gathering statements from riders, handlers, and anyone positioned near the fourth jump. All findings, including the detached shoe, were added to a formal report sent to the Regional Racing Committee for full review. It was September 3, 2016, and a college football game was underway in northern Missouri. Warm weather and a steady breeze moved across the small stadium while students, families, and local residents filled most of the seats. Conditions looked normal for an early season matchup. One of the starters was 20-year-old outside linebacker Jacob Shin, a junior history major who had built a reputation through consistent travel game performances. He'd played in small stadiums across northern Missouri and southern Iowa, and people who followed the regional schedule recognized his number from those trips. Around campus, his name came up most often after away game weekends, when classmates who made the drive talked about his stops and pressure plays. He lived in the dorms, worked part-time in the school library, and completed summer conditioning without any issues. Coaches hadn't noted anything unusual in the days before the game. The opponent was a conference rival, so the crowd was larger than usual. Through the first 3 quarters, Westbrook held a steady lead. Jacob rotated in and out of defensive series, making routine plays, drinking water on the sideline, and staying with the defensive unit during adjustments. The temperature stayed in the high 80s degrees Fahrenheit, and players used shade tents and towels between drives. Near the end of the third quarter, spectators in the upper rows noticed a change in the sky to the west. A thin, dark cloud line began forming behind the stadium, but no lightning or thunder had been observed, and radar showed only a developing cell several miles away. Stadium staff monitored the conditions, though no delay was announced because no strike indicators were present. The game continued normally as coaches rotated players to manage the heat. Midway through the fourth quarter, the wind shifted sharply and the temperature dropped several degrees within minutes. The sudden change prompted the officials to confer again with staff, but with no lightning detected and no audible thunder, play resumed while radar updates continued to be monitored. Jacob entered the field for another defensive series. The opposing offense lined up near midfield. As the quarterback took the snap, a sudden burst of wind swept across the field. Several players later said they felt the temperature drop sharply right before the incident. Before the play fully developed, a lightning strike hit the field. The bolt made contact near the defensive formation, close enough that several players were knocked off balance. Jacob, positioned a few yards inside the hash marks, took the full electrical ground current. Spectators in the lower rows saw him collapse immediately, falling straight to the turf without bracing. The whistle blew instantly. Players stepped back from the area and the sideline staff rushed onto the field. Multiple athletes nearby showed signs of brief disorientation, but Jacob remained motionless where he fell. Coaches signaled for trainers, and officials called for an emergency stoppage while confirming that another strike had not followed. The stadium grew silent as staff assessed Jacob. They cleared a wide space around him and moved unaffected players toward the benches. The marching band stopped playing, and the announcer instructed spectators to remain seated while the field was secured. After several minutes of evaluation, the referee met with school officials at midfield. With lightning continuing to appear nearby, the remainder of the game was canceled. Both teams were escorted off the field, and spectators were directed to exit through designated gates as storm warnings were issued. Jacob was pronounced dead shortly afterward. Medical review determined the cause of death to be cardiac arrest and internal injury caused by a high-voltage lightning strike. The electrical current had traveled through the ground and into his body at the moment he collapsed. Officials noted that the type of strike he sustained is typically fatal on impact. The college filed the required incident report, suspended all football activities for the week, and released a brief statement confirming that the game had ended early due to a fatal weather-related emergency. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more videos, don't forget to subscribe.